please like, comment, and subscribe. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a deep dive into a tragic, true crime case. It unfolded in East Haven, Connecticut, back in 2020. We'll be looking into the life and death of Lizzbeth Aleman-Popoca. Right? We've got articles and reports here, and I have to say this story is one that really stays with you. It's a story of resilience, love, betrayal, and ultimately, the pursuit of justice.
You know, what's fascinating about this case is how it really highlights the dangers of controlling relationships. We'll be looking at how those seemingly minor red flags can escalate, and sometimes with horrific consequences. And we'll discuss why recognizing the signs of abuse early on is so crucial.
Absolutely, yeah. It's truly heartbreaking. So let's start with Lizzbeth's background. She was born in Guerrero, Mexico in 1993. Her childhood was marked by some real hardships. She became the primary caregiver for her younger sister at just 7 years old when their mother left.
Wow. You have to consider the impact of that kind of responsibility at such a young age. It likely shaped Lizzbeth's character in some pretty profound ways, fostering that incredible resilience and determination she became known for.
Yeah, and those traits were definitely put to the test. At 15, she immigrated to the U.S. alone, working hard to send money back home and create a better life for herself. She became a mother at 19 to her daughter, Astrid.
Imagine the courage that it took for a young woman to leave everything familiar behind. To face such challenges alone, this really speaks volumes about Lizzbeth's strength and dedication to building a brighter future for herself and her child.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Then she met Jonathan Acapina, an immigrant from Ecuador here in the U.S. They started a family together, raising their daughter in East Haven. But behind this picture of a happy family, a much darker reality was brewing.
Right, and this is where we start to see the insidious nature of domestic abuse. It often starts subtly, with controlling behavior that can be easily dismissed or rationalized. Abusers are often very good at manipulating their partners and those around them.
Right, and according to Lizzbeth's sister, Jonathan wasn't physically abusive, but he was controlling. He limited her autonomy, isolated her from her family, and tried to control her finances.
Classic signs of emotional manipulation, a form of abuse that can be just as damaging as physical violence. It's all about power and control, and sadly, it often escalates over time. These early warning signs are so important to recognize.
Then, on June 30th, 2020, Lizzbeth vanished. Just like that. Gone. Jonathan claimed she had left for Mexico, taking her belongings, even some cash, but leaving her phone behind.
This fabricated story is a tactic we see often in domestic violence cases. It's a way for abusers to control the narrative, buy themselves time, hoping evidence might disappear or witness accounts become less reliable.
That makes a lot of sense. But of course, investigators weren't just taking his word for it. What they found was pretty damning. Surveillance footage completely contradicted his story.
Exactly. The footage showed him driving Lizzbeth's car, making trips to his workplace, and even purchasing a shovel and a hoe from Home Depot. This goes beyond simply creating a false narrative. These actions point to a deliberate plan to conceal a crime.
Yeah, it's a chilling thought. And then there's this detail about the air freshener. The footage shows him spraying air freshener in the trunk of the car.
This detail highlights the importance of forensic evidence. Even seemingly insignificant actions can betray a perpetrator's attempt to conceal their crime. He was likely trying to mask an odor, which adds another layer to this disturbing picture.
It's terrifying to think how easily he thought he could get away with it. 2 weeks later, the tragic discovery was made. Lizzbeth's body was found buried behind dumpsters at Jonathan's workplace. The medical examiner determined she had been asphyxiated.
The location of the body, combined with the surveillance footage, paints a very clear picture of Jonathan's actions and his desperate attempts to cover up his crime. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a premeditated act designed to ensure Lizzbeth's silence.
So facing this overwhelming evidence, Jonathan eventually pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to 25 years without parole.
While no amount of time can bring Lizzbeth back, this sentence does provide some measure of accountability and justice. It also sends a message that domestic violence will not be tolerated. The court recognized the severity of his actions and the need to protect others from his potential for further harm.
Yeah. It's a small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. This is such a sad story, but it raises so many important questions. What are some of the key takeaways from this part of Lizzbeth's story?
I think one of the most crucial things we can learn from cases like this is the importance of recognizing those early red flags: control, isolation, and emotional manipulation. These are all warning signs that should never be ignored.
It's a reminder that abuse can be subtle and insidious, often hiding behind a facade of normalcy. But we need to trust our instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is.
Absolutely. And we also need to understand that domestic violence is a pattern of behavior, not just isolated incidents. The purchase of those tools, the attempt to conceal evidence, the fabricated story, these all point to a calculated plan of action, not a sudden, impulsive act.
This is all incredibly disturbing, but I think it's important for us to talk about this, to shed light on these patterns so we can better identify and address them.
I agree. Awareness and education are our most powerful tools in the fight against domestic violence.
Well said. And on that note, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far. When we return, we'll delve deeper into the aftermath of this tragedy and explore some of the broader implications of Lizzbeth's story.
It's important to remember that Lizzbeth's story, while tragic, is not unique. Domestic violence is a widespread issue, and it often escalates over time. The fact that Jonathan went to such lengths to cover up his crime, it really suggests a disturbing level of premeditation.
That's what's so unsettling about this case. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated act. And that brings us to another disturbing aspect of this case, the role of technology. We've already talked about the surveillance footage, but it's worth emphasizing how crucial that evidence was in disproving Jonathan's lies and holding them accountable.
Oh, absolutely. Technology is playing an increasingly important role in these investigations. In this case, it provided a clear and irrefutable record of Jonathan's actions, from his trips to his workplace to his purchase of the tools he likely used to bury Lizzbeth's body.
Yeah. It's almost as if he left a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading straight to his guilt.
In a way, he did. And this highlights the fact that in this digital age, our actions, even seemingly mundane ones, can have significant consequences. We leave digital footprints everywhere we go, and that information can be used to expose the truth, especially in criminal cases.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's often a light shining on the truth, waiting to be discovered.
Exactly. And while technology can be a powerful tool for law enforcement, it's also important to remember that it can be misused. Abusers can use technology to track their victims, control their communications, and further isolate them from their support systems.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Technology is a double-edged sword, and we need to be aware of both its potential benefits and its potential dangers.
I think it's also worth noting that this case highlights the devastating ripple effects of domestic violence. Lizzbeth's death has left a void in the lives of her loved ones, especially her young daughter, Astrid.
Yeah. It's hard to fathom the pain and trauma Astrid must be going through. She lost her mother in the most horrific way imaginable.
And now Lizzbeth's sister, Yaneth, has stepped in to care for Astrid, a testament to the enduring strength and resilience of family in the face of unspeakable tragedy.
It's a beautiful and heartbreaking act of love. Yaneth is determined to honor her sister's memory by ensuring Astrid has a loving and stable home.
It's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope and love can endure. And while Lizzbeth's story is one of loss and grief, it's also a story of resilience, of a family coming together to support one another and to seek justice for their loved one.
This deep dive has been emotionally heavy, but it's been so important to explore the complexities of this case and to talk about the broader issues of domestic violence.
Absolutely. Lizzbeth's case is a stark reminder of the insidious nature of abuse, the importance of recognizing warning signs, and the devastating consequences that can occur when these issues are ignored.
We've covered a lot of ground, but before we move on, I wanted to circle back to something you said earlier about the escalation of abuse. Could you elaborate on that a bit more? What are some of the patterns we should be aware of?
Of course. One common pattern is a gradual increase in the frequency and severity of abusive behavior. What might start as subtle attempts to control or isolate a partner can escalate to verbal abuse, threats, and eventually physical violence.
So it's not always a sudden explosion. It can be a slow burn, making it even harder for victims to recognize the danger they're in.
Exactly. Another pattern to watch for is the cycle of abuse, which often involves periods of tension building, followed by an acute abusive episode, and then a period of reconciliation or honeymoon phase. This cycle can repeat itself over and over again, with the abusive episodes becoming more frequent and intense over time.
It's a manipulative tactic designed to keep the victim trapped in the relationship, hoping for change that may never come.
And it's important to understand that abusers often use a variety of tactics to maintain control, including gaslighting, blame shifting, and minimizing their own behavior.
This all sounds very familiar. Are there any specific red flags we should be particularly vigilant about?
One major red flag is isolation. If a partner suddenly becomes withdrawn from their friends and family, it could be a sign that their abuser is trying to control their social connections.
That makes sense. By limiting the victim's support system, the abuser gains more power and control over them.
Precisely. Other red flags include extreme jealousy, possessiveness, controlling finances, and constantly checking up on the victim's whereabouts. Any behavior that seeks to monitor, restrict, or control the victim's autonomy should be taken seriously.
It's heartbreaking to think that Lizzbeth might have experienced some of these things, but by talking about them, we can help others recognize these patterns and potentially escape similar situations.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, and by understanding the dynamics of abuse, we can empower ourselves and others to identify dangerous situations and seek help.
We've delved into the darker aspects of this case, but I think it's also important to remember that Lizzbeth was more than just a victim. She was a young woman with dreams, aspirations, and a deep love for her daughter. What can we learn from her life, from her strength and resilience?
Lizzbeth's story reminds us that even in the face of adversity, the human spirit can endure. She overcame incredible challenges throughout her life, from a difficult childhood to immigrating to a new country alone.
She is clearly a fighter, determined to create a better life for herself and her daughter.
And despite the tragedy that befell her, her legacy lives on in the hearts of those who loved her, especially her sister, Yaneth, who is carrying on her memory by caring for Astrid.
It's a testament to the enduring power of love and the importance of family in the face of loss.
And while Lizzbeth's story is a cautionary tale, it's also a story of hope. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there are people who care, who fight for justice, and who work tirelessly to support victims and survivors of abuse.
It's a reminder that we're not alone in this fight. There are resources available, organizations dedicated to helping those affected by domestic violence, and communities coming together to create a safer world.
And that brings us to an important question.
Yeah.
What can we do as individuals and as a society to prevent tragedies like this from happening in the future?
That's a great segue into the next part of our conversation. When we return, we'll explore some of the resources available and discuss what steps we can take to address this complex and pervasive issue. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Before we went to that reflection break, we were talking about Lizzbeth Aleman-Popoca's story and the broader issue of domestic violence. You know, the warning signs and those patterns of abuse. It's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But as we've said, we think it's so vital to have these conversations, to provide resources for those who need them.
Absolutely. Silence only protects abusers. Knowledge and open conversation, those are most powerful weapons in the fight against domestic violence.
So true. So let's shift gears a little and talk about those resources. Where can someone turn if they're experiencing abuse or suspect that someone they know might be?
Well, one of the best starting points is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. They offer confidential support 24/7, and their website has a wealth of information on recognizing those signs of abuse, creating safety plans and understanding legal options.
Yeah, their number is 1-800-799-SAFE, that's 7233, and their website is thehotline.org. We'll also make sure to link to it in our show notes for this episode.
Another valuable resource is the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, or NCADV. They advocate for policy changes, educate the public, and provide training and technical assistance to organizations on the front lines of this issue.
What about resources specifically for younger people? It's hard to imagine going through something like this at such a young age.
Right. There's a great resource specifically for young people called loveisrespect.org. It's a project of the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and it's designed for teens and young adults. They offer confidential support through text, chat, and phone.
It's so important to have these different avenues for reaching out for help. Not everyone feels comfortable talking on the phone, so having options like text and online chat can be really helpful.
Absolutely. It's about meeting people where they are and providing support in a way that feels safe and accessible. And it's also important to remember that there are resources tailored to specific communities and situations. For instance, the National Center for Victims of Crime has resources specifically for LGBTQ+ individuals, immigrant communities, and those experiencing elder abuse.
It's great that there are so many specialized resources available.
Yeah.
It really shows how much work is being done to address the unique challenges faced by different groups.
Right. And for those concerned about their digital safety, the National Network to End Domestic Violence offers guidance on tech safety, including how to protect privacy online and secure your devices. It's crucial to be aware of the ways technology can be used both for help and for harm.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've talked about the role of friends and family. What can those close to someone experiencing abuse do to help?
Well, just listening without judgment and believing their story can make a huge difference. Offering a safe space and emotional support can be incredibly valuable. Let them know you're there for them and encourage them to seek professional help if they're ready.
Sometimes just having someone validate your experience can be incredibly powerful, especially when you've been subjected to gaslighting and manipulation.
Exactly. And if you're concerned about someone, don't be afraid to reach out. Express your concern, offer support, and encourage them to seek help, from a trusted professional or a domestic violence hotline.
Lizzbeth's story has been tough to process, but it's such a powerful reminder that domestic violence can happen to anyone. She was a young woman who had overcome so much, working hard to build a life for herself and her daughter.
It really does. Her story highlights the importance of vigilance, awareness, and action. We need to challenge the societal norms that perpetuate silence and shame around these issues.
Absolutely. We need to create a culture where victims feel safe to come forward and seek help, knowing they'll be believed and supported.
And we need to continue to advocate for stronger laws and policies to protect victims and hold abusers accountable. This isn't just a personal issue, it's a societal issue that demands our attention and collective action.
Lizzbeth's legacy lives on, not only in the hearts of those who loved her, but also in the ongoing efforts to prevent future tragedies.
Her story is a call to action for all of us. To learn more, to speak out against abuse, and to support those working to create a safer and more just world.
Well said. This deep dive into Lizzbeth's story has been a vital, though difficult, conversation. We hope it's encouraged you to learn more, to reach out for help if needed, and to support those around you. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please remember, you're not alone. There is hope, there is help, and there is a path to a brighter future.
Remember, change starts with awareness. By having open conversations, challenging harmful norms, and supporting organizations working to end domestic violence, we can make a difference.
Thank you for joining us on this incredibly important deep dive. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And please, let's continue this conversation, both online and in our communities.